Welcome back to Ancient Egyptian Object Stories. In this episode, we will examine a very unusual stela belonging to an official named Abkau, and which provides unique visual evidence of one of ancient Egypt's most important religious rituals. The object in this object story dates either to the First Intermediate Period or the 11th Dynasty, which was the dynasty that opened the Middle Kingdom period. The text that would have decidedly dated the stela does not survive, but stylistic analysis places it in the time frame I have suggested. Intermediate periods are modern categories of ancient Egyptian history and usually are made up of a length of time where ancient Egypt was affected by disunification, political turmoil, or complete shifts of power. The First Intermediate Period falls between the Old and Middle Kingdoms and comprised 4 dynasties of ephemeral kings ruling concomitantly in the north and south of Egypt. King Neferhotep of the 11th dynasty ruled from Thebes in southern Egypt and was responsible for the reunification of Egypt once more. Usually, kings ruled from the north in Memphis, but Neferhotep ruled from provincial Thebes, a city that would later grow and become the religious center of Egypt. During the First Intermediate Period, a new type of art emerged in the south, a provincial art that developed as a result of estrangement from the professionally trained artists of northern Egypt. Such art continued into the reign of Neferhotep, who also implemented innovations to architecture, exemplified by his mortuary temple abutting and partly cut into the western cliffs of ancient Thebes, a site now called Deir el-Bahri. This site was also selected by the 18th dynasty pharaohs Hatshepsut and Thutmose III for their own mortuary temples that imitated Neferhotep's architectural plan. First Intermediate Period and 11th Dynasty provincial art is primarily characterized by elaborate detail and carefully organized figures and hieroglyphs. Offering tables on funerary stelae are laden with goods, but rather than depicting disorganized piles of food and other goods, First Intermediate Period offerings are arranged in a manner where one might observe each item distinctly. The items are separated by sometimes generous negative space and seem to float in the air. Gone are the careful renderings of the human body. Limbs are dramatically thin, and musculature of male figures, once so prominent in Old Kingdom traditional art, is greatly reduced or absent altogether. Large eyes stretch across the entire width of the face and are outlined in relief to resemble kohl, and fingers are elongated and stiff. Lips are defined by incised lines, and eyebrows run in almost straight lines above the large eye. Sunk relief was cut quite deep, while raised relief was cut high. Greater detail was applied to textures such as that of hair, jewelry, clothing, bird feathers, and reed leaves, which actually represent loaves of bread. Even depictions of pottery and furniture were decorated with incised lines and hatch marks. Such art continued into the 11th dynasty, demonstrated by the reliefs of Neferhotep's mortuary complex, as in this example depicting one of his wives, Khemsit. The stela we are studying in this object story is decorated in the same style as the provincial art of the First Intermediate Period and 11th dynasty, thus allowing us to date it to this time frame. The stela is that of the overseer of herds Abkau, seated on the right, and who is accompanied by his wife Imemi and other members of his family. It is carved in high-raised relief in exquisite detail. Individual strands or curls of hair are carefully rendered. Textures of baskets, clothes, jewelry, and feathers are also depicted. The offerings are arranged in their own individual space that collectively forms a rectangle. Below the offering table appears a false door that is decorated by 2 eyes similar to those of the coffin of Nakht Khnum that we explored in episode 5. The stela does not survive intact. The top portion and part of the right edge of the hieroglyphic inscription has broken away, yet what remains was carved clearly with an expert hand and happily is still legible. The text indicates that the stela was erected in a cenotaph or false funerary chapel at Abydos, associated with the Osiris temple there. Abydos is a site in southern Egypt that was dedicated to the god of the dead Osiris. This site was a major mortuary and cult site since pre-dynastic times, first dedicated to the jackal gods Wepwawet and Khentiamentiu, and over time dedicated primarily to Osiris. Annually, a festival procession took place at the site that celebrated the religious story of Osiris. The festival coincided with the annual flood of the Nile and ensured the completion of the Osiris mystery that resulted in his regeneration. What makes the Stela of Abkau particularly special is not the text or the art style, but rather a unique and as yet undeciphered, at least not absolutely, register above the figure of Abkau. No other known collective iconography exists. Many scholars believe it depicts the actual rituals that took place during the festival procession of Osiris. This is important because it may illuminate otherwise unknown details of one of the most significant festivals of ancient Egypt. The iconography that strongly suggests this is that to the left of the boat that is arranged in the center. The leftmost art appears to tell the story of Osiris's death and regeneration. Osiris was believed to have been the first king of Egypt. His brother Seth was jealous and murdered Osiris, and subsequently chopped him into several pieces and distributed these pieces throughout Egypt. His wife Isis and their sister Nephthys mourned his death and then reassembled him, whereupon Isis magically conceived the falcon god Horus, who later avenged his father. The images on the left of Abkau's stela may depict this story. The torso that rests upon two Ankh signs, symbols of life, may represent Osiris's reassembled body. This is followed by the image of Isis and Nephthys mourning at his bier. This image features often in funerary art. Lastly, the child seated upon the shoulder of a man may represent Osiris's resurrected form, or even possibly Horus. The figures surrounding these vignettes of the Osiris myth appear to be marching in procession. On the other side of the boat, several more figures who carry various standards march toward the right, while the three rightmost falcon-headed figures are kneeling in a pose of rejoicing. The boat in the middle of the scene must be the sacred Neshmet bark upon which people raise standards that may represent the fetishes or icons of Osiris. In the text of the stela, the Neshmet bark is mentioned, but this was often the case with the private stelae erected at Abydos. A disembodied head with a uraeus on the brow is lifted up by a kneeling man in the bark and may possibly refer to the head reliquary of Osiris Khentiamentiu. The Neshmet bark is the particular boat that was a major participant in the festival of Osiris and which carried the image of the god himself. The activities of the festival of Osiris are famously described in the text of the stela of Ichernofret, dating to the 12th dynasty, by which time the festival had become especially popular. In the text it reveals 3 barks were used in the festival, and the Neshmet was that which carried the image of Osiris via a waterway, either a sacred lake or a canal, from the Osiris temple to the beginning of the processional route, or conveyed the image back to the Osiris temple at the end of the festival procession. Somewhere along the processional route, the image of Osiris was transferred to 2 other boats at different intervals. The boats were carried along the processional route to Osiris's burial site at Peker. The site that ancient Egyptians associated with Peker was in fact the tomb of 1st dynasty King Jur at the early dynastic royal necropolis, now called Umm-el-Gab. It is unclear whether the unusual register of the Stela of Abkau depicts a narrative of the procession beginning with the exit from the Osiris temple with votive props to be used along the processional way, or if it depicts the disembarking or embarking from or to the Neshmet bark and the beginning or end of the procession to or from Peker. Due to the figures on the left moving leftward toward the boat, and the figures on the right moving rightward toward the boat, it is possible the festival participants are embarking onto the boat, signifying the successful completion of both the festival and Osiris's regeneration. One question that remains is where exactly did the Neshmet bark moor after its departure from or to the Osiris temple? Logic, of course, would place it directly at the beginning of the processional way, where perhaps there was a sacred lake yet to be identified archaeologically. The dedicatory stelae of the 12th dynasty do not indicate where the bark would have rested. In the New Kingdom, many of the royal monuments had been erected at Abydos in the votive zone along the processional route that were integrated into the festival of Osiris. But the stela of Abkau dates at the latest to the 11th dynasty. The stela had likely been set up in the Middle Kingdom chapels area near the portal temple of Ramesses II, and evidence indicates a first intermediate period settlement existed nearby in the area now called Kame Sultan. But what about an 11th dynasty state or royal cult building? In 2014, an Egyptian-led archaeological mission working in Abydos made a discovery that may be described as one of the most important within the last decade at Abydos. It reshaped what was already known about the religious landscape at that site. They found a Mahat chapel, a commemorative cult chapel, built by 11th dynasty king Neferhotep Mentuhotep, that is decorated with pictorial relief and texts that describe its prominent role in the festival procession of Osiris. It appears to have been built following Neferhotep's reunification of Upper and Lower Egypt. The chapel was built a little ways south of the beginning of the processional way and the Osiris temple enclosure, aligned with both the Temple of Osiris to the north and Unalgab to the west. The text in the chapel commemorates Neferhotep's construction of a canal for the transport of the Abyddin gods, including Osiris, and features a relief of the Neshmet bark personified as a goddess. This evidence confirms texts on later Middle and New Kingdom stelae that mentioned the Neshmet bark was conveyed via a water route, even though archaeological evidence for such a canal has not yet been found. Therefore, it is possible that this was the Neshmet bark's mooring place, which was also personified as a goddess in the relief art of the chapel. Indeed, a post hole was found cut into the rock of the chapel and was identified by the archaeologists as a mooring post. Such a mooring place was possibly used up until the 19th dynasty, when the enclosure wall of Seti I's temple obstructed the Mahat chapel of Neferhotep Mentuhotep. At this time, the Seti temple made its own contributions to the Osiris rituals and likely rendered the Mahat chapel redundant. Thank you for watching, and I hope you will join me again for my next ancient Egyptian object story. For further reading, please see the description box below. If you liked this video, don't forget to click the like button and subscribe to be notified of future content.